Hi everyone. So we're going to do kind of a fun little live today. I am going to talk about this book that I've been reading and the first couple of chapters, which is about Hamilton and Jefferson and their early scandals. Also talks about a man named James Callender, which I don't know if y'all know who that is. You said you can't hear anything? Somebody else let me know if you're having trouble hearing. I'm going to try to, can y'all hear? I'm going to put up the volume. Never mind, it was glitchy. Okay, well, it's all good. All right, so I got my kind of like old schooly attire. Oops, there's on my petticoat on. We're ready for this. So this book is kind of interesting. It's called Sex with Presidents, but it starts off, let's see. So it starts off and the first couple of chapters are about Hamilton and Jefferson. So I don't know if y'all know this, but Alexander Hamilton, he had a pretty public scandal. Basically, so the story for him starts off, this part of the story starts off in 1791. He met a young woman who was married. Her name was Maria Reynolds, and she came to him asking for help. She wanted money. She said that her husband was abusive and that she needed fare to get out of, I believe they were in Philadelphia at the time. Yeah, out of Philadelphia and travel to family in New York. So he goes to where she's staying and he brings her money, about a sum of $800 at the time. She was a very attractive woman, and it turns out, he goes up to her room, talks to her about this, and they end up having relations. So she is still technically married to her husband at the time. They have an affair for about over a year total. But pretty much her husband starts to catch wind of this. I guess he had even kind of used her as a prostitute in the past to make money off of and everything like that. And he starts trying to extract money from Alexander Hamilton, which Alexander Hamilton didn't have. So he extracted that money from the federal treasury. He was the Secretary of Treasury at the time. So the book kind of talks about a sum of about $30,000 is what they had gotten out of him, basically through blackmail of okay, well, if you don't give us, this money, if you don't, the husband basically, if you don't give me this money, I am going to expose you for the affair that you're having. Hamilton was married at the time to Elizabeth Schuyler. I mean, that was his only marriage and her only marriage to Elizabeth Schuyler, who was the daughter of a Revolutionary War general, who also went on to be a senator, I'm pretty sure. So they extract money from him for a period of time. And, basically, eventually Reynolds, the husband, he ends up in jail, and he wants money from Hamilton to get out. Hamilton at that time tells him no, because I believe he was there on speculation charges. So he tells him no to giving him any money, and then Reynolds, gets other people involved, somebody named Clingham and a few other. Someone says, first and foremost, how are you doing? I'm good, thank you. So anyways, and a few congressmen at the time, and I think, actually, I'm sorry, I missed something. So Clingman had actually seen Hamilton leaving Reynolds' house. So that's how things kind of got suspicious. Those two people both ended up in jail. And he, approaches some other people in government at the time and lets them know, there's something going on with Hamilton. So Hamilton kind of tries to explain everything away. Mostly he's very, very worried about the charges of stealing from the federal treasury. He tells them about the blackmail, about the relationship, tries to prove it with letters and everything. And he thinks that for the time he's kind of resolved everything, but not for good. So it was years later, I believe it was in 1797, there's like a scandal author. Basically, he's a journalist named James Callender who writes about all kinds of, political figures. He writes smear campaigns, different things like that, looks into them. He had been a stenographer in Washington. He was originally from Scotland, I believe, and he had even gotten basically driven out of England because he was, speaking against, I guess, the crown at the time. So he was a journalist, and he figured out kind of what was going on with Hamilton and everything. And he wrote an article, something about 1796, and he threatens, he drops a little threat in there to expose Hamilton with the things that he's been doing, because Hamilton had been writing all kinds of letters and basically making himself sound like he had the highest moral character of anyone in the government. And this journalist just knew, that he had dirt on him, and he could basically, out him for everything that he was doing. Oh yeah, thank you. My house is looking good. And embarrass him and ruin his stature. So Hamilton confesses to everything. He talks about the affair, all of that. One thing I don't recall is I believe he did talk about the blackmail at that point and the money and everything to make himself, yeah, he did, because he wanted to out himself as, I'm just somebody who got caught up in an affair. I'm not somebody who was actively stealing from the treasury. I was being blackmailed. So he writes a piece back on that to try to kind of clear his name so that he doesn't politically look so bad. And after that, he's kind of out of the government for a while because the scandal was so big and everything. Embarrassed his wife, embarrassed his family, made him look bad. But so James Callender, he goes on, he kind of hooks up with Thomas Jefferson at that time. Jefferson wants to use him to write articles before the so it's a few years later, before the election of 1800, to make John Adams look bad so that he can win the presidency. And apparently there was even stuff as crazy as saying that the president was a hermaphrodite and all kinds of things in these articles. And actually he had passed some laws too, some alien sedition laws, trying to get it so people couldn't even speak out against the sitting president, but that didn't stop this journalist, and it didn't stop Thomas Jefferson. So anyways, as it kind of goes on, the journalist actually ends up getting in trouble, I believe, for the articles that he wrote about Adams goes to prison or goes to jail. He wants to get out, so Thomas Jefferson, when he does get elected, because he actually does win the presidency in 1800, he pardons James Callender, he pardons him and gets him out. Okay. James Callender wants to be made postmaster of Richmond, and Jefferson tells him no. So the guy's slighted, he's upset, he's already a slander journalist, he writes a lot of articles, outing people and stuff, and he actually knew about a couple of things that had happened in Thomas Jefferson's past, one of which I didn't get that much information on. It wasn't in this book at all, but it was kind of interesting. A lady named Betsy Walker, it was a friend of Thomas Jefferson's that he had apparently made passes at, who was a married woman back when his own wife was alive. So that was some of the allegations apparently that, the journalist spoke about. I don't know if he talked about, Thomas Jefferson had another affair that this book talks about when he was serving as ambassador in France. And that was with another married woman. I think it lasted for about a year. He wasn't married at the time. His wife had actually died prior to that. I don't know that the journalist spoke about that. But what he did go on to talk about, most interestingly to, you would think most interestingly to the American people and everything, was the fact that Thomas Jefferson had a long relationship, and I guess there's some controversy about this, but to me, everything I've read, it seems like it's pretty accurate, is that Thomas Jefferson had pretty much a lifelong relationship after his wife died with Sally Hemings, who was his slave. She mothered several children for him. I'm trying to think. She had maybe 4 or 6 or something. Only a few survived to adulthood. I think 3 or 4 of them survived to adulthood. But basically, he was sharing information about this, talking about how his relationship with Sally Hemings had began when he was over in France, and that she'd become pregnant at that time, come back to America with him. And she was pretty young. I think she was like somewhere around the age of 16 at the time. So pretty crazy stuff. Thomas Jefferson, he decides just not to respond at all. He doesn't say anything about these allegations, and he just kind of goes about his day. So as a result, the American people also didn't really pay much attention to, the writings about Sally Hemings or anything. Okay, so somebody says 4 survived, 6 or more were born. Okay, yeah, that's better stats. Thank you. So the crazy part of the story is that, James Callender, it wasn't just those three people that he had written hit pieces about, or the fact that like Thomas Jefferson had apparently paid him to write articles against John Adams. He was writing about all kinds of people. So all sorts of people were mad at him. And the book actually references somebody wrote an open letter kind of like threatening him, like, I wish I could find the page, but basically saying like, you don't want to end up in the James River, or you're going to go drink the James River or something, or be ashamed, And several months, I think later, which was July 17th, actually my birthday, but 1803, I believe 1803, he was found dead, drowned in the river. This journalist was in only 3 feet of water. Now, a lot of reports say like he was very depressed. He drank a lot. He was a drunk at that time, like after everything that had gone down with Hamilton, people turning against him and everything, and him kind of not really actually having a leg to stand on since, that ploy didn't really work. That he had just kind of become an alcoholic, and that maybe he just like tripped into the river and drowned. But there was a lot of people that didn't like him. He outed a lot of people on many of their scandals. Jefferson, being the most recent, Jefferson also being up for re-election in 1804. So it was pretty suspicious. It was a pretty interesting story. This is kind of one of those early American history things that you're like, this is mind-blowing. Like, I didn't know. Okay, I actually feel like school would have been a lot more interesting if they would have taught us all this when they taught us like the Revolutionary War and everything, like the scandals and the people's like actual lives. Like, I hate to say it, but it makes the story so much more realistic and more interesting to listen to. But I mean, I guess maybe they wouldn't have taught us all that in school, but I'm just saying like maybe a college course or something, it would have been interesting, because I didn't know about Alexander Hamilton's affairs. I didn't know that he had basically been blackmailed and stolen money from the treasury. I didn't know anything about Sally Hemings. I didn't know anything about really James Callender for sure. That was very interesting story. So I think they would do better to teach us more about these kind of like these real life situations. So Alexander Hamilton, another kind of interesting story about him is that, so his wife, Elizabeth Schuyler, Betsy Schuyler, she actually lived to be 99, I'm pretty sure. So, when they tell you like, oh, people only used to live to 40 years old, Alexander Hamilton died young. I think he was 48, because obviously he was in a duel with Aaron Burr. People connect to a story. Yeah, exactly. You're going to connect more to people's like real lives. You said he was Clintonized, like how Clinton kind of like lost all his credibility after his affair and everything. It's really hard to drink an energy drink out of a teacup, you guys. It's too bubbly, but it's so good. This is my energy drink. But I poured it in the teacup for effect in my little old house with my outfit. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. So actually, Betsy Schuyler, she was like a very reserved, matronly woman. They had 8 children together. Sadly, their oldest son died in a duel prior, like about 1 year before Alexander Hamilton. And a lot of people think that the bad advice that he gave his son to like throw his shot away and do the gentlemanly thing was maybe, the reason that he died in that duel. And then the reason that that Alexander Hamilton was like so duel happy and just ready to get in a duel with Aaron Burr and do the exact same thing because he was like just racked with guilt. Okay, someone said, this is wicked chill. Do you do this every day? Also, is this what the play Hamilton is about? I've actually never watched Hamilton, but I will do this probably not every day because I'm gonna have to read the other ones, but I will do this through this book because the next one is super interesting. It's actually Grover Cleveland, and he's accused of rape, which is crazy. And supposedly he never even denied it, but we'll get into Grover Cleveland next. I do want to do some more stories about revolutionary people too, though. Off topic, love your outfit. You look nice today. Thank you. I put it on for this. I was like, okay, we got that old-timey skirt. I have these kind of crazy boots on. I wish I could show you guys. Like, they're not the ones I was going to wear, but they kind of go with the outfit. They're a little bit pirate, though. Love the teacup. Thank you. Look, so when I moved to this house, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to buy somebody's china set because people sell them like on Facebook Marketplace and stuff. This was a 54-piece china set, originally like about $300. I bought it for like $100. And most people never ever use them. This one has like gold plating and everything. They just keep them up so they all look perfect. But I was like, I'm going to use that every single day. So every day I eat off of fine china. It's pretty fun. I was just about to call my girlfriend because I'm so bored at work, but I'd rather hear about this stuff. Yeah, that's funny. Invite her on. I need to read about Grover Cleveland, one of my favorite presidents. Yeah, that one is very interesting. I just started it, but I will definitely do that. If you read about it, we could do a live together. That'll be fun. Yeah, so anyways, back to Alexander Hamilton. He married Betsy Schuler. They had 8 children. After their first son died, which was like about a year before he died, his second oldest daughter, I believe, who was very close to him, kind of like they said, like went mad. She ended up eventually having to live in an asylum because according to the book I read, which was kind of historical fiction, so I don't know how many of the gaps were just filled in, but she became kind of like almost violent with younger siblings, like, and it was too much to handle at home. Alexander Hamilton never wanted her to have to be institutionalized and tried to get his wife to promise, according to this book, which again was kind of historical fiction, but tried to get her to promise to like keep the daughter at home, but she just apparently couldn't handle her, and had to institutionalize her later in life. But so they had 8 children. Betsy was, excellent mother, excellent wife, like just one of those really like high class ladies. Like I said, her father was a general in the Revolutionary Army. I believe he was a senator afterwards, and just a very upstanding family. Alexander Hamilton, though, he was actually born an illegitimate child, no father in the Caribbean. His mom gave him up, like placed him basically for like, adoption or for other people to care for him to a merchant family there in the island, somewhere in the Caribbean that he grew up on. So he was super smart. He worked with them and everything, but all the people in the town and his community recognized that he was so intelligent that they had actually paid to send him off to New York to get, educated and everything. And that's where he had like joined up with the Sons of Liberty. And then he'd gotten involved in the Revolutionary War. He was so smart. He was George Washington's camp to aid, so he wrote all his letters for him. There's a lot saying that he wrote speeches for him and everything, but and this is what everyone hates Alexander Hamilton, but to me, he's like the original American. Like, he is the original person, like back before there was Alexander Hamilton, before there was this America, there were haves and have-nots. You were born into riches. You were either Thomas Jefferson, where you inherited a plantation and a bunch of slaves and a bunch of money and things like that, or you were born into poverty, you lived into poverty, and you basically died in poverty. So he was one of the very first people who had that upward mobility, despite even, like being an illegitimate child, not even having a father. That was a big thing that back then. That was a big issue. And he still was able to go on and become, one of the highest ranking people in the government. He wasn't elected to any of the offices, but he was appointed, Secretary of Treasury, and he served there. So sounds like a plan. I will get the Cleveland book ASAP. Oh, awesome. Okay. But anyways, so when he got to marry Elizabeth Schuyler, that was a big deal for him because that like legitimized him also. Like he had a wife now who was like of the higher class, and that actually really was a huge thing for him. But Elizabeth Schuyler, you know, like I said, she was like more of a matronly woman, very just like, I don't know how to describe it, I guess. Like she would be not like a beauty, like an attractive woman, but just very matronly, very motherly, very wifely, the perfect companion for Alexander Hamilton. But Alexander Hamilton, you know, he comes from that background of, you know, he was an illegitimate child. He had a chip on his shoulder. He had a fiery personality. He had intellect and wit, but also, you know, like I guess some would say some demons or that drive about him. And, you know, there's a lot of people that say he really liked women. And one of the women that he apparently liked, even back before this Maria Reynolds affair, was this sister of Betsy Schuyler, which is Angelica, which I believe she married someone, so it was Angelica Church. And there's all kinds of flirtatious writings, letters and stuff between them over the years where people believe that they actually had an affair, that he had actually had like a sexual relationship with his wife's sister. And I believe somebody had actually even accused him of it in some writings that they did later on. But I thought that was kind of interesting. I visited Mount Vernon, and that helped me understand the man's history, tremendous history in the DC area. That's awesome. But yeah, so that was kind of the first scandal that Hamilton was accused of. He had the Reynolds affair. I believe there was probably others along the way. There was somebody, was it Abigail Adams? Somebody had written about him. Somebody's wife had commented about him in here saying like he had the devil in his eyes and that he was, you know, had a bad reputation and air about him when it came to women. And I can't remember exactly who had said that, but it's all interesting stuff. As far as Jefferson goes, there's still controversy to this day. Like, is the Sally Hemings story real? This book and another book implies that they feel like the family probably would have burned any letters that he wrote to Sally or any mention of her. There were some signs that probably those were his children. Like he never wrote down the names of the fathers of any of Sally Hemings' children. He left her out of a lot of documentations. And, you know, there was obviously lots of people talked about a resemblance between them. And later on, they did go on and do DNA testing, although it was almost like they didn't use someone from Jefferson's like exact lineage or his own DNA. So it's like there was still question up in the air of like, oh, could it have been like his brother or something like that, like that fathered the children of Sally Hemings. Now, when they go back through the dates of like when her children were born and stuff, there's no child, according to this book, that was born at a time that Jefferson couldn't have fathered it, like because he was away at Washington and away from Sally Hemings or anything like that. So it looks very clear that that is what happened, although people will still try to say that they don't think so. There was some other controversies too about Hamilton that different scholars have written about, and even back in the day when it was happening, saying that it was possible that Hamilton actually didn't have an affair with Maria Reynolds, and that he made that up to basically cover up the stealing that he had done and like some type of scams that they were doing. So I don't know about any of that, and I think Reynolds and Clingman had actually, when they had gone to jail, that was for speculating, I think, and they were supposedly like defrauding like veterans of the Revolution with like their pensions or something like that. I have to look it up. But so I don't know if they were trying to imply that like Hamilton was a little bit more involved in that, and he made up the Maria story as a way to like sidestep taking responsibility there. But it's pretty interesting. And one of the reasons that they cited for that is that they tried to say that the letters that Maria supposedly wrote to him, there was like words that were very long words that were written, spelled correctly, and then very simple words were spelled incorrectly. And a writing analysis, you know, expert or whatever felt like that implied more of like a very intelligent, educated man trying to make a letter look like it was from an uneducated woman. Yeah, if they had discussed this in history class, I would have actually listened, right? It's so interesting. You're just like, it's okay. What's most interesting about it is, first of all, you're like, these are real people with real stories. They weren't perfect, but they also made some amazing contributions to the country. You know, we don't, and this is something we all need to learn to do. We can't like glorify any of these political figures to the point where we act like, oh, they're like gods on earth or something. Like they're perfect. They're going to have great moral character and great intellect and always put the country first and always put their families first and always do everything correctly. Like a lot of very powerful people, and this book actually starts off with that. It talks about hubris, like when people get in power, they start to act differently because they basically feel, I forget exactly how they described it. They had a really good like description of it that wasn't really anything I'd read anywhere else, but basically like they start to feel so powerful and they act in ways that they otherwise wouldn't. Like power corrupts. And so very highly successful people often, and this is something Tim Grover talks about in his books too, but they have like what he calls the dark side. So there's things about their personality, things that drive them, things that they want to do that a lot of other people have been taught to be good. But very, very powerful people, a lot of times, like they withhold that part of their personality or like their habits, that they're still like, well, I'm not going to be good all the way. You know, like this is something I want to do and I'm going to give into it. So it's interesting to look at the founders and realize that even though the times that they were alive in, it was so different than it is now. Like back then you were supposed to be like pious, pure, like always faithful to your relationship and stuff. And to realize that some of the most powerful people in society at that time were doing the exact opposite. And they were getting caught up in scandals and they were slandering each other and they were fighting with each other just like we do today. Like it's the exact same human nature. And so it makes it interesting to look at politics today and realize like if they were doing that in 1800 and we think of those people as like the pinnacle of our society, like of course that's what people are doing in politics today. It's no different. Human nature hasn't changed. And as much as we like to believe it, people weren't like so much more moral back then. I did think it was interesting too. A man is a man, sweetie. That's what someone said. Yeah, but the women were women too. Maria Reynolds was in that relationship with Hamilton. She was a woman, but she also was involved. Same thing with, Angelica Schuyler, Angelica Church. If that was an actual true story, she was involved with Hamilton, the husband of her sister. Although that's just rumors. I mean, it's like lots of different sources talk about it, not just this one. So it's kind of interesting to realize that. Another thing that I thought was interesting, because I always look at what do they tell us about the past and today, and then like what facts do I find? So just like how they tell us like everyone only lived to be 40 200 years ago or 100 years ago, and then you read, well, Betsy Schuyler they said she was climbing fences at 80 something years old. She was in good health and lived to be 99 years old before she died. So you're like, clearly no. Same thing, somebody was telling me like all the founding fathers, or not all the founding fathers, every American president has been over 6 feet tall, and that includes the original presidents. So George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they were 6 feet tall. So when they tell us like, oh, people used to be 5 feet tall, I'm like, here's 2 examples. We have someone that lived to be 100, and we have 2 people that grew to be over 6 feet tall or 6 feet tall that we know of right there. So I always like to look at that. One thing that I thought was interesting was this Maria Reynolds. She actually divorced her first husband, married a second husband. There was some, I feel like that was before the scandal came out with Hamilton and everything. They left, they went to Britain. They either broke up or whatever, but he was gone out of the picture. She comes back to America, lives, works for another man who's a doctor, and she eventually goes on to marry him. So even though she wasn't a widow in any of those situations that we know of, I'm not sure, they never really said what happened to the second husband or couldn't tell, so possible that he passed away, but it looks like she either had 2 divorces, 3 marriages, or at least 1 divorce that we know of from Reynolds, and possibly maybe widowed the second time. I don't know, I'm just making that up, but and 3 marriages. You think that that stuff didn't happen back then, but look, here's an example. There was somebody else in one of these stories too, that same thing, the woman had multiple marriages. It was like maybe her daughter. So you think like, oh, they didn't do that back then, but sure enough, people are people. Okay, that comment I'm definitely not reading. That's odd for you to say. I should probably just block you from this live. But yeah, so it's interesting. I always like to think about that. What was the past really like? You know, what, how tall were people? How long did they live? What were, you know, were they having scandals back then? Were they getting married multiple times? Looks like it was. You know, they were doing all the same things they're doing now. Same thing, Alexander Hamilton. You know, you thought people were only born in wedlock and everything. Well, look at Alexander Hamilton. His father wasn't in the picture. He wasn't married to his mother. So things really haven't changed that much. You know, politicians are saying the other politicians are hermaphrodite, and writing slander articles about them, all kinds of things. People are turning up dead after they do call out presidents and stuff. It's bizarre, but it's also history, and it's just interesting to look at that and realize like the people of back then were not the saints that they try to paint them as. They were regular people with all the problems that regular people have. So very interesting. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all so much for watching. I will post this to YouTube. Most of my lives, unless they're very just like organic, like not really on a topic, from now on, I'm going to be posting them to my YouTube channel instead of saving them to IGTV. I have a couple of things coming up. So if anybody is interested in learning about nutrition, basically like why carbs aren't evil, why you need all the different macronutrients, any questions that you have, like a Q&A that you want to do with me and a couple other coaches that I work with, we're going to do a webinar, and that's going to be March 26th, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. Just message me, send me your email address, and I'll get you on the list for that, and we'll be just sending you a Zoom link for the webinar. This is something I want to try to do probably every month, like on different topics with a few coaches that I work with, just to kind of get the information out there, get to know people, and share on some good fitness topics. So, but yeah, check me out on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, check me out on Instagram, That Liberty Chick on YouTube, THT Liberty Chick on Twitter, and I have a Facebook page, but I don't really use it, so you don't need to bother. Please feel free to leave comments, even if they're negative comments. Throw tomatoes at me. I'm not going to block you or anything. I like to know good, honest feedback. If the sound sounds terrible, tell me. If the lighting's terrible, tell me. That's something I'm going to work on, promise. I was just talking to Brian earlier from Counter Thought Rundown. From Counter Thought Rundown is the segment we used to do together every single week. He was helping me. Now that I actually live in my house, I'm ready to get, you know, a microphone, a divider, like some lighting and everything. So he was helping to kind of coach me on like what things I need to buy to make this a little bit more professional for y'all. So but yeah, feel free to leave any comments, give me suggestions. Positive comments, always welcome too. Also, DM me if you're interested in that, if you want to come to the webinar. And if you have any suggestions for topics you would like me to talk about, or that you would like to collaborate on, like if you have a knowledge on a topic that I don't, like, and I would love to have a discussion with you, please send me a DM and let's collaborate and do a live together. So, all right, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Tonight, I'm going to be back for Brian. It's going to be like just a very impromptu, fun chat on just basically like, you know, marketing, politics, different political ideologies, like how to kind of like further the message out there. He's a Republican, I'm a libertarian, so we have two kind of unique perspectives, and it should be pretty fun. So check that out. I didn't put it in my schedule, but you can see the link in my stories. So check that out. Y'all have a fantastic day, and thank you so much for watching.